Focus on Art is made possible by Denbo's of Claremore, an official Rolex jeweler offering a selection of diamonds, men's and women's jewelry and watches, china, and figurines. Open 9 to 6 Mondays through Saturdays, Denbo's is located at the corner of historic Route 66 and Will Rogers Boulevard in Claremore. RSC-TV thanks Denbo's for their support of Focus on Art and public television programming.
Focus on Art. A personal visit with the artists, museum curators, and gallery directors of Northeastern Oklahoma. A presentation of the Rogers State College Art Department.
Welcome once again to Focus on Art. I'm your host, Barbara Cohenauer. This evening we're at TUCA, that is the Tulsa Center for Contemporary Arts, and my guest is Carter Hall. Carter, welcome to Focus on Art.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Carter has an exhibit that's currently on display at TUCA, and Carter, you have a very interesting name for that exhibit. It's called
Neo-Technic Fusion.
Well, let's talk about Neo-Technic Fusion. Exactly what's involved here?
We're talking about the new technology today and how it relates to, in this case, the family.
Okay, and these are extremely large works of art. What kind of materials are we using here?
Mainly, I'm a junk sculptor. I use available materials that I can find. I finance all these things myself, so I'm forced to use materials that are readily available or thrown away. I recycle a lot.
Okay, well, this is certainly a time in history when we're interested in that. Let's talk just a little bit, first of all, about Carter Hall and how you got to this point of being a recycling sculptor.
Well, I've been in Tulsa about 10 years. Got my graduate degree from the University of Tulsa, and it was there that I really developed the interest in recyclable materials. Starting out with a ceramics background, I was used to low overhead. Clay doesn't cost very much. Having a wife and family, it's hard to finance grandiose works. I'm not a video artist. I couldn't afford to do that, or a photographer maybe, but being a sculptor, it allows me to travel around in the area when I see a vacant lot with a piece of metal that I might be able to use, or an old abandoned building with some air conditioning units inside that are not needed anymore. I try to utilize those things.
Are you putting these pieces together by welding them together?
In most cases, the bones or the superstructure is welded together. The rest of it could be bolted together, riveted, various ways, yes.
Carter, do you go to salvage yards to find materials?
To some extent, when I have to, if I need something special. I'll go to one of the local salvage yards and look around. There's so much to be had, it's hard to pick, but yes, I'll go to a salvage yard at the last minute.
It's kind of like going to the grocery store or to the supermarket.
Oh, when you're hungry, yes.
Okay, so you've been creating these pieces of or sculptures that have recycled parts now for what, about 10 years?
Yes, I got my graduate degree in '84, so actually it's been only 7 years that I've been doing my postgraduate type work. But yes, even as a graduate student, because it took me about 3 years to get my degree, I was using scrap iron, things like that, because you know, as a student, you don't have a great deal of money.
Today we're at Tucka. Could you tell us just a little bit about Tucka?
It's a center for contemporary artists to show their work, not necessarily for sale, but to get the exposure. That's what I really appreciate, is the chance to show my work in pretty nice surroundings, in a professional type way, where a lot of pressure isn't placed on me to produce a saleable item so that the gallery could get its 30 or 40%. There's a lot of pressure on artists to produce a saleable item where if something they have created sells, the gallery owner will ask the artist to create more of those things. Everything I do is one of a kind, and so I'd be hard pressed to make a whole series of the same piece.
You're not necessarily creating these works of art to sell them immediately.
Oh, not by any means. They're either too large or too expensive. It takes me 3 or 4 months at a time. The person or the individual generally wouldn't want it in their home or outside in front of their home. Mainly what I do is individual works, maybe for a gallery or hopefully someday a museum, but we'll see.
Well, I certainly can't imagine why they wouldn't very quickly be in a major museum. They're very, very interesting. Let's talk for a minute about the technical aspect of your art. And I know that every piece in this exhibit, except for the piece that's over your shoulder, actually moves or lights up or something. Is there something in your background, other than being an artist, that might cause you to have the technical know-how to do these kinds of things?
Yes, there is. Before I became an art major, I was a physics major. I've always been maybe a little bit of an inventor, so that really influences what I do. Generally, I'll come up with an idea or a concept where I want the work to produce sound of one kind or another, or light, and I try to construct a work around that particular aspect. Now, in the case of the giant robots, I wanted them to have some sort of gimmick, and that's what I call it, as a gimmick, something to get the viewer interested. If the robot is shaking vigorously, as if it's having a fit, anyone, regardless of their background, whether a professor or a transient, will stop and look. You know, and that's the gimmick, that's the hook that gets them in to look at the work, because it's the, shall we say, the form and the color and the formal aspects that make it art, you know, per se.
Very interesting. Well, since we began the show with you dancing with the large female robot, why don't we talk about that piece first?
Oh, okay. It was created after the large male as an effort to, everything needs to have a series in art. You need to concentrate on a certain point where you can develop the works around that one certain point. And so after Dino Guy, and that's what we call him, was made, I knew he had to have a mate. It was just obvious. Everyone needs somebody.
And you took one of his ribs and...
There you go. As a matter of fact, yes, I did take some spare parts left over from him and developed Dino Woman. She was mainly the start of her began at the head and the eye, and whatever I could find that would fill the space. If I would, say, for example, find an old pump off of a steam boiler, a very large pump, mind you, that, for me, would make the decision for me as to what a great heart that pump would make. So I would put that in the position of the heart on her. And things like that help me to decide. Junk available, whether it looks like a filter, it might make a nice lung. If it looks like an arm, if it looks like a leg, If its function may be some sort of respiratory function, I might put it up in the chest area. All those things help me make the decisions that I make.
Carter, let's talk for a minute about what makes a dino gal move around.
She's got a mechanism in her similar to that of a small toy you might have as a child that runs into the wall and allows it to come back. That was the concept behind it. A mechanized, motorized system where she would just bang around inside of a room, and whatever she would run into, she would turn around and come back the other way. Unfortunately, because of her scale and the sheer weight of it, she weighs probably as much as a Volkswagen. She would literally tear the room apart in there.
Okay. So you have her somewhat under control?
So yes, I demonstrate her. I try to control her and dance with her, as you saw, but it's the only way out at this point because she is a bit dangerous.
Okay, well, I won't ask her for a dance then later in the show. Carter, where do you create these pieces?
Well, believe it or not, I create them all in my neighbor's garage.
This is a good neighbor.
Yes, this is a very good neighbor. He kind of rented me the garage area because he knew I needed it. I was working outside at the time, and weather conditions affected what I did. So he had a very large garage that he said, well, why don't you use it? I kept borrowing it anyway. So he said, why don't you move in there? It's a nice area except for the fact that it has a very low ceiling. And as you notice, most of this work is twice my height. So I end up constructing it in sections. Possibly in the case of Dino Guy and Dino Gal, they were never really fully assembled until the show. I didn't have a place to test them or anything. Everything was untested until the day of the show, and luckily everything works.
Great. Where do you store all of this when it's not being shown in a gallery?
Well, luckily I have a very large backyard behind my studio near the alley. I've created quite a stir in the alley behind my house. I set them up there, not functionally, of course. They wouldn't roll around or shake, but they would just stand out there in the backyard and like sentinels and guard the backside of my studio. My landlord loves them, thank goodness. The neighbors don't seem to mind. As a matter of fact, I think I'm on a tour or something. Cars keep going by slowly, and look at that, look at that. Yes.
Oh, great. Well, I know one of your big missions is to have your work seen, so
Exactly.
if it's drive-by art, I think that has a real ring in the 1990s here. Well, let's talk next about Dino Guy.
Dino Guy was the first in the series, and he's what started this whole thing about creatures. I was usually making, shall we say, attractive art, slick. Even though this piece behind us isn't very slick, it's not unattractive. It's not menacing by any means. But I was traveling along Utica one day when I saw they were tearing down a house. And of course, I wanted to check it out. There might be some good material there. And lo and behold, inside the basement of this abandoned house, the house was gone, the basement was there. Inside the basement were some furnace parts, floor furnace, like you'd heat your home with. It was an enormous floor furnace, though. It had been a big house. And I noticed them. They kind of caught my eye, but they were tin and rusty and old and beaten up, and the bulldozer would run over one of them. But I was kind of thinking about them, and down among some rubble, I found what appeared to be a pair of pants. It was actually part of the furnace, but it looked exactly like a pair of Bermuda shorts. And that's where the concept of Dino Guy began, around those large pair of Bermuda shorts. The rest, just came as I would find a part that looked like a head, or find a part that looked like a midsection or an abdomen, bent steel that looked like feet. That's how it all started, was around him.
Wonderful. Now, what does he do?
He has a kind of a different mechanism. I wanted him to move in a way that would maybe shock the audience or get someone's attention if they were walking by the window. So he stands very still for 28 minutes out of every half hour. And then all of a sudden his head will begin to shake back and forth as if to say no. At the same time, his eye, he only has one eye. His eye will go out as if he's blind and kind of bang around inside of his head as if he's losing consciousness. All of this causes his appendages to shake because they're all kind of attached with springy materials. So he has a kind of an epileptic seizure. All of this kind of action will either scare the viewer shock the viewer into watching him, or astound the viewer into stopping long enough to give him maybe a little credit, because it's more than just junk. It's something that is mechanized. It's something that someone has taken the time to put motors, gears, and cogs into to draw the viewer in, catch their eye, cause them to look at it.
Well, it certainly works for me.
Well, thank you.
You extend the family concept to include a third person. So let's talk about the family child a little bit.
Yes, V6, made from a Buick engine, yes. I had a little show coming up. They needed a quick little piece for the Claremore show up at Rogers State College.
Oh, okay.
And V6 was available. I had a Buick V6 engine. My neighbor, the one that I rent the garage from, had me help him change the engine in his car. And I was glad to do it, especially when I asked for the engine. He said, sure, you can have it. And I knew I could make something out of it. He had an old Buick with a blown-up engine. And I took it all apart and laid it out on the ground to see what I could make out of it. The family needed a baby. So I constructed V6 as a result of that.
Okay, and does V6 have any movement or do anything?
He moves in the extent that he's kind of springy. If you push on him or play with him in any way or move his arms, he's, I hate to say it, but no, he doesn't move on his own. You need to touch him first, yes.
Well, quite often that's the way with children. They have to be guided
Yes.
in their actions and so forth. So I think that's perfectly appropriate.
Okay.
Well, every family should have a family pet. So let's describe the family pet.
It was something on the lines of maybe a porcupine or an armadillo. Family pet kind of grew out of the dino guy, dino gal slang terms we used to use. The dinosaur idea really affected me greatly. I wanted to create a prehistoric creature, so to speak. Nothing out of this world by any means. I didn't really want a dog, but I wanted something maybe a little bit vicious. I thought back on some old cartoons that I've seen where the children of a prehistoric family would ride small dinosaurs and things like that. So I made the creature or the pet on the scale on the lines of say maybe a porcupine or an armadillo or one of those low type armored creatures. He has spines on him. He has no teeth, but he has a mouth. Some bulbous eyes, something that would look menacing, but not in a sense that maybe would hurt the children, like a dog with no teeth.
All right, and he certainly follows well when you lead him on his leash.
Yes, it does have a leash. That was the gimmick, the way to get him to move around the room freely without running into anything or hurting anyone. Instead of mechanizing him, I put a leash on him. That allows the viewer to play with him to any extent they wish. They can go around and around in circles and check out the movement of his vertebrae. That's the way each section interacts with another section. They kind of interweave their spines together. I like that. I like the look of that motion, and it was easier just to put a leash on them and haul them around.
What kind of parts did you use?
Oh gosh. It started out being a collection of recliner mechanisms. That's not recliners. I guess it was more like like a desk chair mechanism. That mechanism that allows you to swivel and lean back in your desk chair and put your feet up. I had a lot of those at my disposal from L&M Office Furniture in town. And they would call me up and say, we got some more broken mechanisms for you. You want them? Come by and get them. And that's how I get a lot of my stuff. People know that I'm interested in junk and call me up, and I'll come get it. I went down there and I collected about 10 or 15 of these mechanisms, and that's how the creature's backbone started, by connecting all of these mechanisms together. And then I had to add, spines, which came from all the pipe, and I had a lot of pipe. I collect all kinds of pipe. And then I had to have some sort of skin, something to cover up those mechanisms so you can't see them. So as my job at Philbrook was to clean up the school and make it look fresh and new for the opening October 11th at Philbrook. There was a lot of old shelving, metal shelving, that was used for storing things that was 10 or 15 years old and was all rusty and nasty looking, and they didn't want it anymore, and let me have some of it. And it was perfect for skin. It was thin, it had some color to it. It had been painted several times, some awful colors, but it allowed me to beat it out very quickly with a ball-peen hammer, dimple it is what it is, and into a shape that would cover up all of those chair mechanisms and the wheels, and give it a little bit more of a skin like an elephant might have. So that allowed me to pull that off pretty easily.
Well, Carter, I have to admit the family pet is really my favorite piece, but we do have 2 rooms of very exciting sculpture here. So let's take a look at some of the pieces in this room.
The first one would be the pipe organ, which was constructed in 1985. It was specifically designed around a grant that was available to me. The grant said, sculpture that makes noise. Okay. I had in my possession acrylic tubes. I had in my possession a great deal of sheet aluminum, and so the materials were set. I knew what I had to work with. I went to the library. I looked up pipe organs. Actually, I was looking up one type of pipe organ, which is a reed pipe organ. It has a reed in there like a duck call that allows it to blow. At that point, I didn't really want to do the reed organs. It looked a little difficult. So I researched into what is a medieval pipe organ. In medieval times, all of the pipes of the pipe organ were the same outer diameter. They were the same roundness. Their length was varied according to what tone they wanted to achieve. If they wanted a high tone, or a low tone, they'd vary that length. It worked not the first time or even the first week. It took almost a week to get the first sound out of it. I had the sculptures made before they actually made the sound. There's little tiny parts inside the throat of a pipe organ that allow it to make the noise. It's just like your vocal cords. If all of those parts are in exact relation to one another, it doesn't make a sound. You have about 1, 2, 3 parts, and it's like you have to get all 3 of those together before it'll make a noise. It wasn't until an hour before the opening that it actually made noise.
Let's take a look at the piece that's over your shoulder, the one that doesn't do anything.
Yes, the 2,000-pound cabinet. I got a call from a friend of mine. He's the curator of the museum here in Tulsa, Ed Wade, and he said, I'm tearing out the boiler in my basement so I can build a, I don't know, playroom or something. He was tearing out the boiler, and he asked me if I could have it, and, if I wanted it. And I said, sure, I'll come and get it. I had no idea what it was. The only thing I remember seeing about the boiler was a big asbestos igloo. That's what they kind of look like. They look like igloos. I don't know if you've ever seen them in the basement of old homes in town, but they'll have a door on them that firebox door, but all you can see is the white igloo covering. So I didn't have any idea what was inside, but I was going to come get the iron and steel anyway. So I went down there, and I didn't have any idea how much this thing weighed. Each individual section, and they broke it all up into sections so they could carry it out of the basement, weighs about 100 pounds. I loaded it all up on the trailer and hauled it home and sat around in the backyard so I could kind of look at it for a while and figure out what I was going to do out of it. I had no idea at that point what I was going to make, but when I counted up the doors or the parts of it, I realized I had something here that could be a cabinet. I had 6 units that could be hinged, 2 of which could be doors, and they had kind of window shapes in them that I could put glass in, and I thought a lot about my mother's china cabinets and things like that, and all those little things influenced me to build a cabinet out of a steam boiler that was originally constructed in 1935. It's that old.
Wow. A very contemporary
Contemporary sculpture out of ancient.
Yes, out of ancient things, and yet based on an idea, a china cabinet.
Exactly.
It's an idea that's probably 150 years old.
I think it would look fine with china in it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
You just have to find someone who has a house that their floor will support this much weight.
That's the problem, yes. It's been in the backyard because it is so heavy you just can't put it on the floor just anywhere unless it's concrete.
And then we have one final piece to talk about, the piece that's over my shoulder.
Yes, the 2 electric altitudes. I had at my disposal, someone had thrown away a Bud neon light. You've seen them in windows of bars and things. It's a neon light.
Just through the window.
Yes, right. And somebody had thrown a beer bottle through it or something and broke the neon fixture, so they just trashed the whole thing. Now, I knew from my background in physics, etc., that transformer produced about 300,000 volts, which is enough to strike an arc in a normal atmosphere over some distance. So I got myself some large rubber gloves, and I took the 2 wires and I put them together to see what kind of arc I could create. When I realized that would work, I got some longer wires. I'd always been fascinated with old horror movies. I'd love those Jacob Ladder in the background, bzz, bzz, going off. So I would experiment with wires and such and see what kind of effect I could get of this electricity climbing the ladder up these wires. Once I got the wires the way I wanted them, all I had left to do was construct the sculpture around them. So the idea began with electricity.
Carter, do you want them to call you too if they have boilers in their house they'd like to get rid of?
Oh, please do, yes. Call me, I'll come get it all the way, no charge.
Okay, great. Well, we certainly appreciate your being with us again this evening. Until next time, this is your host, Barbara Cohen-Arrow, wishing you a most pleasant good evening.
Focus on Art is made possible by Denbo's of Claremore, an official Rolex jeweler offering a selection of diamonds, men's and women's jewelry and watches, china, and figurines. Open 9 to 6 Mondays through Saturdays, Denbo's is located at the corner of historic Route 66 and Will Rogers Boulevard in Claremore. RSC-TV thanks DINBOS for their support of Focus on Art and public television programming.
RSC-TV, KRSC, Claremore.